So we are now crunch time, 3 months out. This is selection specific prep, selection specific train up to show up as ready to smash rucks as you possibly can. Of course, I'm going to talk about other things because you're going to have to be good at other things too, but selection is a mostly ruck dominant thing. And a lot of people, going back to what I was kind of talking about earlier with the either leisure walking or running, like no in between, not practicing fast walking. A lot of people mess this up here because they practice ruck running for like gait week where they're going to have to go really fast, and they don't do a lot of other rucking. They don't spend a lot of time just walking with a ruck on at various different speeds, at fast speeds, at nice, easy speeds. And although you have to be fast enough at rucking to get to week 2 and week 3, you got to get through gate week by putting up good ruck times as well as other things. Most of the rucking that you're going to do at selection is going to be walking. You're going to be walking during land nav. You're going to be walking during team week. So the vast majority of time you're wearing a ruck, you're either going to be standing still is another one too. You're either going to be standing still or walking. So definitely remember that. Don't just practice rucking as fast as you possibly can, although we will do some of that during this phase. So again, this is 3 months out. For most people, 2 full body lifts and 1 calisthenics day, or calisthenics strongman combo where you do a bunch of strongman stuff like carries, sled drags, sandbag work, odd object carries, and so on and so forth. That's going to prep you for the CRA as well as, more importantly, team week. Lift, I would do full body, maybe something like Monday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday. Maybe you do Monday, Wednesday, full body, and then Friday you do your calisthenics and carries day. That's what I do with most of my clients, and it works out really well. You don't necessarily, even if you are not all that strong, you don't necessarily have to lift any more than 3 days per week, but I would say even 2 days per week. You can get really good results on that split right there if you are putting a lot of intent behind your lifts. I will say if you are really weak and you're already really good at running and rucking for whatever reason, maybe you got a good endurance background or something like that, and somehow you're also good at rucking, yeah, you probably can get away with 3 days per week, maybe 4, but for most people, the vast majority of people, if you're lifting 4 days a week going into selection, you're just kind of, your priorities are backwards. I always say this, selection's an endurance event with a strength component, not the other way around. So just consider that. When you're lifting, you also want to consider a lot more specific calisthenics. You also want to consider lower volume, higher intensity. So you don't want to be doing tons of extra sets, tons of extra reps. Honestly, you're just going for a stimulus, progressive overload. Even if you just maintain your strength throughout this time, that's totally fine. You want to pick maybe 5 or 6 lifts to do on day 1, 5 or 6 lifts to do on day 2. And they should be the big movement patterns, and they should not be anything super crazy or complicated. You want to consider also a little bit less spinal loading during this time, or axial loading, because you're going to have your ruck on a lot. You're going to be carrying things a lot. And if you're doing everything with a barbell, like barbell deadlifts, barbell front squats, barbell back squats, barbell RDLs, like barbell rows, that is going to potentially add up to just being a lot of spinal load. And the more you load your spine, it's a very good thing. You want to adapt to it. But also, if you're doing it needlessly, when you could otherwise be doing like a belt squat, or you could be doing a single leg RDL, that's a lot less spinal loading than like a heavy ass deadlift. That's going to allow you to limit your fatigue, your overall general fatigue. Spinal loading is like a separate source of fatigue beyond like muscular fatigue, nervous system fatigue, mental fatigue that I talk about all the time. So consider that too. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do any. You can absolutely do some, but it should be like maybe 1 day of lifting, you do a non-spinal loaded squat. So maybe a single leg squat or a belt squat. And then that day you can do a deadlift or a deadlift variation. That's your axial loading for that day. And then maybe the next day you do a axial loaded squat and a non-axial loaded hinge, like a 45-degree back raise or a hip thrust or something like that. That's not a hinge, but it still works similar muscles. So that's just a consideration that not a lot of people talk about. I do have an old video that I can link to in the description where I talk about how to set up your lifting template going into selection. But anyway, you just want to consider that. And as for running, we got a little out of order. So usually I talk about running first, then lifting, but we'll talk running second. So running, you want to consider just doing very specific things. Of course, if you're still a weaker runner, you want to maybe consider doing 3 or 4 runs a week, maybe 1 ruck some weeks, 2 rucks other weeks. If you're already pretty damn good at running because you did the right things in the previous phase, then you can consider maybe running twice a week, maybe 3 times per week, or maybe twice 1 week, 3 times the next week, something similar to that. And you want to really consider running around your goal paces. So you're going to run somewhere around 2 miles, somewhere around 4 miles, somewhere around 6 or 7 miles. No one really knows, but you want to be doing some tempo work for sure. You can use your 5 mile pace. You can hit a 5 mile time trial before this phase and see where you're at and use that pace to pace your tempo runs. And then you can probably do a 2 mile run, a 2 mile time trial, and determine your goal paces based off that. And that's how you do your run training. So can you do long runs? Yeah, you absolutely can, especially if you're already really good at rucking. But I would not do a really long ruck with running in it, which I'll talk about ruck training here in a second. But I wouldn't do that plus a long run every single week. That's just a little bit too much. But that doesn't mean you can't run 3 times per week. You could do an easy, moderate run if you need a little bit more work on your running. So now let's talk rucking. All right, so this is when the rucking specificity shines. Generally speaking, for most people, unless you're very weak at rucking, I would recommend twice a week. Earlier in the week, do something a little heavier, 50, 55 pounds, maybe put 60 to 65 pounds on your back once in a while just to see how it feels. And you're doing this ideally cross country some weeks. So you could either do land nav practice or you could walk in a similar environment to land nav out in the woods, ups and downs. If you don't have access to that, not a huge deal. You can do it on roads or ideally some sort of dirt road so it's not quite as impactful. Or you could do it on trails, whatever you have access to kind of. But you do want a little bit of a change in elevation. Now, if you're prepping for SFAS, I don't really know what RASP looks like. It's probably pretty similar to Camp McCall, but it's not crazy elevation changes. It's slight rolling hills. That's really the main thing you need to mostly be focusing on. If you live somewhere where it's really hilly, it's not the end of the world, but it's a little bit less specific. And, you know, it's not like if you don't live there, you're fucked because you are not going to be good enough at going up hills. As long as you expose yourself to a little bit of rolling hills, you're probably going to be good to go. So that's 1 ruck per week, starting maybe 60 minutes and then going up to 2 hours, 2.5 hours, maybe even 3 hours for that session. That I would not consider that my long ruck necessarily for the week. The other ruck that you're going to be doing that week is going to be your long ruck. So say this is on a Saturday or a weekend day. This is like to replace from previous phases your long run. Again, similar terrain, definitely not off trail. Like you don't have to go do this through the woods or anything like that. This is kind of more prepping for gate week. So you want to expose yourself to a little bit of rolling hills, ideally not on pavement or mostly not on pavement, just because it's going to beat you up more and it's less specific to what you're going to see at selection. You're going to be on sand and dirt. This is when you can start incorporating a lot more ruck running. And generally, if you go back to the last phase when I talked about doing it for short periods of time, this is when you can start building on that. So maybe a couple rucks in the last phase, in the support phase, you ran or trotted 2 out of 10 minutes for 70 minutes total. So that's 14 minutes total. Next ruck, to start this phase, you can consider doing 3 minutes of running per 10 minutes, then 4 minutes. This ruck will continue to get a little longer, a little longer. I personally like using time. You can use mileage if you want, kind of up to you. But this ruck should probably top off at 2.5, 3, maybe even a little bit more than 3 hours for some people. And again, it should have parts of the ruck where you do a little bit of trotting. Now, this is when downhill running comes into play with a ruck on. Your body needs to adapt to ruck running downhill, but not all that much. You're going to ruck run downhill a couple times during gate week. And if you don't do it at all in training, which usually people will train like they test and they'll do a ton of ruck running downhill, so they don't have to worry about this. But I wouldn't recommend doing that because it's just going to beat you up more, but you should do some. So I would start considering this around 7 to 8 weeks out. You do a little bit of ruck running downhill. Maybe the first time you ruck, you do 6 or 7 minutes total of ruck running downhill spread out in multiple different sections. Then maybe 4 to 5 weeks out, again, you're going to do some downhill running, this time 8 to 10 minutes. And then probably 2 weeks out, maybe 3 weeks out, right before you start your taper, you want to consider doing some more downhill running. So maybe 10 to 12 minutes. That way you're getting that exposure and you're able to adapt, but you're not doing it nearly as much. It's not going to beat you up nearly as much. It's going to be less fatiguing, less potentially injury promoting, but it's going to allow you to be prepared for it when you get there and you are doing your downhill portions, because when you're at selection, you want to take advantage of the downhills and use gravity and to go fast. That's beneficial, but again, different than testing. And if you haven't exposed yourself to that, it will beat you up. If you've ever run a race and you didn't do enough downhill running in preparation for it, this was me in my half marathon that I did a couple months ago. It just destroyed my quads because I had not done nearly enough downhill running. And although it's easy, yeah, you just kind of use gravity. It's fun. You're going fast, but it does destroy your quads if you're not used to it. But those adaptations don't take a lot. They happen quickly. Again, you're doing like 3 sessions where you do downhill running, a couple months out, a month and a half out, half a month out, give or take, and you're going to be good to go. So you want to consider that as well. Once or twice throughout this time, maybe throw 65 to 70 pounds in your ruck, not for the ruck run, but for the cross-country ruck. For the ruck run, 45 to 55 pounds is, you don't have to go any higher than 55 pounds. Yes, that's less than the ruck is going to weigh at selection, but there's a difference between testing and training. If you are loading up 65, 75, 80 pounds, I've heard of people, I do all my ruck training with 80 pounds. You are not getting extra benefits from that. You're going to get used to using 80 pounds, but also it's just going to beat you up unnecessarily. Like, it's totally unnecessary. If you can smash rucks with 55 pounds or even 50 pounds on your back, you're going to be totally fine when it's 8 pounds more than that, or 7 pounds more than that, or 9 pounds, whatever it is. I promise you're going to be okay, especially if you do everything else right. You train hard and you have a little bit of mental fortitude. And most importantly, when you keep the ruck a little bit lighter, it also keeps you available. It does not potentially injure you or develop an overuse injury. Cross training, this is very situation dependent, person dependent. Some people can benefit from a cross training session per week. Some people maybe every other week. Some people maybe like once a month. You have a non-running week or a minimal running week where you do more cross training. And on that note also, I mentioned doing speed work and I mentioned doing tempo work. Every 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on the person, depending on how you're feeling, depending on your progress, consider doing a non-speed week. You should not be doing 3 straight months of speed work and tempo work every single week. Even high-level runners, elite runners, don't do that. So listen to your body, and even if your body is telling you that you feel good and it's been 5, 6, 7 weeks since you last skipped a speed session or did something different like an easy run or a non-impact session instead of that speed session, consider doing it. Keep yourself available so that you show up ready to crush. So that wraps up the last couple of months before you go. I have another video where I talk about tapering that I will link in the description. I'm not going to talk about a complete taper here because that would take another 30 minutes, but check that video out if you want to learn about tapering. What I will talk about is all the non-rucking things and all the non-training things that are still going to play a role. Recovery, what you do outside of training, is massive. And I've talked about this thousands of times in other episodes, so I'm just going to brush over it. But none of this is really going to do much if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're not fueling well. Huge, huge, huge considerations for maximum performance and recovery and staying injury-free. When you are sleep deprived and or if you are underfed and or if you're underhydrated or poorly hydrated, like you're just sipping water the entire time, you don't have any electrolytes, you don't bring any sort of intra-workout fuel, or you don't really eat anything pre-workout, or you're just not eating well in general or eating enough calories in general, you are way more susceptible to acute injuries as well as overuse injuries. Your body's just not in a state to perform well and also recover well and also heal well from all of the stressors you're going to be putting yourself under, which this is a very stressful process. If you do it the way that I just broke it down, it's less stressful, but still those last few months before you go are highly stressful on the joints, on the nervous system, mentally stressful. You're going to be mentally stressed about your training, and you're also going to be mentally stressed about the fact that you're about to go to selection and you don't know what your fate's going to be. You don't know if you're going to show up and make it or not, or if something bad's going to happen. That's normal, but also it's stressors. The best way to kind of mitigate that is to A, sleep well, eat really well, hydrate really well, and find some sort of stress mitigation technique that you enjoy, that you can stick to, that you can do consistently, that is not training. So of course, training can be a stress reliever for sure. People who generally train consistently are generally less stressed than people who don't. But training is a stressor. And if that's your only stress mitigation technique, just adding more stress to try and manage your stress, you might temporarily feel better, but you have to consider something different, like breath work or walks in nature or talking to a therapist or hanging out with people that make you laugh or watching comedy or something like that, that just kind of calms you down. You're not really thinking about, I got selection coming up, or you're just able to decompress and separate yourself from training. You make all the progress that you're training for, all the adaptations, all of the gains are made outside of training, not training. A lot of people think, especially type A guys that are prepping for selection, however much stress I can possibly handle, that's how much I should do. That's how much I should train in my prep. Because if I just subject myself to crazy, crazy high levels of physical stress, mental stress, it's going to feel easier when I get to selection. And that's not really how it works. Yes, your training should be stressful. It should challenge you. But stress plus rest equals fitness, not stress plus more stress equals fitness. Remember that. It's going to save you, and you are not weak or uncool if you do breath work or meditation or walks in nature or whatever your preferred. You pet your dog and you give your dog a belly rub. That is not weak. That is strong and smart. That's going to help you recover. It's going to help you perform better, and it's going to help you stay or at least mitigate your injury risk. And you're going to show up and go smash.